In this video, we're going to look at some more examples of finding the area of compound shapes. Remember that the area of a circle comes from A equals pi r squared, which stands for pi times the radius squared. We use that even when we're finding areas of half circles or quarter circles. So let's review those two things. A half circle shown here is exactly half of a circle. So the biggest thing to remember is that when you see this dimension given, that's the diameter because it goes all the way across the circle. But for area, we need the radius. So the first thing you're going to do is cut that in half to think about what the radius would be. So the radius here would be 8 since that's half of 16. Next, you're going to find the area as if you're finding it for the entire circle. So pi times 8 squared. I'm going to use 3.14 for pi, and I get 200.96. Now, since we have half of a circle, our final step would be to take that answer and divide it by 2. So the area of just this half circle would be 100.48. And remember, units are squared. We're going to do the same process for a quarter circle. Here, this 9 would be the radius because that would only be to the center of what the full circle would be. So to find the area, I do pi times 9 squared. Again, I'm going to use 3.14. And that would be 254.34. When you have a quarter of a circle, you're going to divide it by 4 instead of by 2. So the area of just that piece of that circle would be 63.585 inches squared. Next, let's look at compound shapes. For compound shapes, you want to break the given shape down into smaller shapes that you know how to find the area of. For this particular example, I see a triangle at the top here with a height of 4 and a base of 6. And then at the bottom, I see a half circle, and 6 would be the diameter. So what we're going to do is find the area of each of those. A triangle comes from base times height divided by 2. So what that means for this problem is I would be doing 6 times 4 all divided by 2. And let's see what we get. That's an area of 12. Again, that's only for the triangle at the top. Now let's look at the half circle at the bottom. It goes all the way across, so that 6 would be the diameter, which means that my radius here would be 3. So the area of the full circle would come from pi times 3 squared. Since I have half of a circle, I'm going to divide it by 2. So for that, I get 14.13. So the area of the total figure there is going to come from taking your two pieces and adding them together. So I would be using my 14.13 plus the 12 that I got from the triangle. So all together, that shape has an area of 26.13 square yards. Let's start the next example, again by breaking it down into the smaller shapes. So at first I see a rectangle. I know that the length of that rectangle is 14. And right now I don't yet know what the width is. So I'm going to skip that and come back to it. Next, I have a half circle. And it tells me the radius of that half circle is 5. So if we think about a rectangle, the area comes from length times width. But I would need to know what this dimension is. So let's look at the circle to have us help. Here, a radius would be 5, which means that this piece would also be 5. So if I continue that radius going down, that means that this would also be 5. So together, that means that that dimension of that rectangle would be 10, coming from 5 plus 5. So the area of that rectangle would be 14 times 10, which is 140. Next, for my half circle, 5 is the radius because it goes to the center. So pi times 5 squared, I'm going to use 3.14. And then I have half of a circle, so I'm going to need to divide that answer by 2. So that half circle would have an area of 39, 39.25. Again, the total area would come from those two pieces added together. So 140 plus the 39.25, giving me a final area of 179.25 square yards. Now, sometimes when you're working with compound shapes, you're not always going to add them together. So here, this example says find the area of the shaded region. And if you look at where that shaded region comes from, it comes from the outer shape minus the inner shape. So what I need to decide is what is the outer shape and what's its area, and what's the inner shape and its area. And I'm going to take those two things and subtract them, not add them. So my outer shape here is a square. And that square is 25 by 25. Then my inner shape is a parallelogram, and that has a base of 13 and a height of 10. So the area of a square comes from the side squared, or length times width works, whichever you prefer. So 25 times 25, or 25 squared. And that gives me an area for that outer shape of 625. Now for my inner shape, a parallelogram is just base times height, that's straight up and down vertical height. So here I'd be doing 13 times 10, which is 130. Now again, I need to do outer minus inner. So I'm going to take this 625 and subtract a 130. So the shaded region would come from the 625 minus 130. So 625 minus 130 gets me that the area of just the shaded region would be 495. So hopefully that was enough to kind of jog your memory back, and now you're going to practice it for the second day.